Amen. So what we've done is we're looking at the midnight cry. We've gone through various chapters in early writings and also the great controversy, and what we've established, hopefully in your own minds, that 1840 is the midnight cry, and also the summer of 1844 is also the midnight cry. And the characteristics of the midnight cry is that it explains the past, the present, and the future. I may not have emphasized one point. Do you have the other pen? Okay, so one thing I haven't emphasized on this point, but hopefully you've seen it. When does all this happen? When does all this information about the past and the future and the present, all this light, when does it all happen? I don't mean a date. Thank you. Sorry? Not how, when. When does it happen? When does all of this, when do you begin to understand about the past, the future begins to be explained? Where are you when all of this is happening? Sorry?
In the summer.
So, I'm not, because that's not the summer, well, I guess it is actually. I guess what the answer to my question is that you have to be in that history as it's happening for you to understand the past and the future. You can't know it beforehand. I guess that's what the only point I wanted to see. I don't know if that kind of makes sense. You have to be at that point in time where the explanation all happens. And when that explanation is happening, things are happening internally and externally. Hopefully we should be able to understand and explain that. So we went through this history. 1840, a major external event, and the events that are happening here are going to help to understand, explain the past. So the way we've understood this is the day 3 year principle. The distress in Europe is going to help explain the events of the time of the end. What we didn't do is go back to the external events here, lay them out as we did here, and their prophetic significance, to show what's actually happened here and why it has prophetic significance. We didn't do that, but we could. What is happening here in 1798, as a quick example? Major events. Papacy receives a deadly wound. So, papacy receiving a deadly wound, and I don't know if we could argue that the United States is rising up, because I'm not sure if you can identify that in 1798 per se. So if the deadly wound's been given, then what can we explain or understand about that history? Okay, so we won't go into it then if no one is sure, but it explains the characteristics of what that first angel's message is doing for people. First angel's message has certain characteristics. What's one of the characteristics of the first angel's message? Or it's what it says, what it wants you to do. I can't hear you.
Leave Babylon for the glue.
So one of the primary characteristics is that now you're released after Babylon has been destroyed from captivity. So it helps you to understand what that event is when you get to here, because I don't think people fully understood the significance of the prophetic significance of what was happening back in Europe. So there's many more things we could go to. We could go to the War of Independence, and we could begin to explain the War of Independence and what significance that had, why it was important that America is rising up. There's many things we should be able to go back into this history and explain through this event here in 1840 that you couldn't explain before.
Proclamation of that first angel comes at the right time, because before that time we see the situation which was in France and which was engulfing the whole of Europe, whereby people were dishonoring God and choosing some other God.
In the whole of Europe, you can show that.
In France, it's now escalating, it's spreading, and so that message which now comes and says, fear God, you see it comes at the right time.
So we've done that. We go to prepare you for the future. We've explained that quite a lot now. We've looked at I've called it the 1842 chart. We've looked at Fitch. We've looked at Snow. 1842 chart, which is 1843 chart, obviously. The name itself is preparing you for 1843. Fitch is telling you to come out of Babylon, indicating that the second angel's message is there. He's not going to use Revelation 18, he's going to use 2 Corinthians 6:17, I think. Snow is also beginning to understand that from February to April, about his own message, which is the message of the second angel, and all of that's happening beforehand. So there's that preparation time. We've got 300 charts. We've got Gideon, Spartan, the Foxes. We didn't look at 300 years of Enoch, 300 pennies for Mary's oil. Then we go to the summer of 44, and we see the same characteristics. This one perhaps is easier because we have more information on it. In fact, this is the one that led us to this understanding. In the summer, you can begin to understand the past. What you're basically understanding is the disappointment, how it happened, why it happened. And connected with the disappointment, the major thing you can understand is why there's this persecution happening. So they're both connected points. The mocking and the persecution is that we can see that the Protestant churches have basically become Babylon. So it explains that, and perhaps they couldn't see that then. And the other thing they're looking at is the tarrying time, the disappointment, and they can pick that up from Matthew 25. All that can be understood in this history. The second angel is speaking. The situation between Protestants and the Millerites is getting worse, and they're getting to a place now that they're going to call the people out of Babylon. That's this voice that they hear here. And there are 3 meetings. There's Boston, Concord and Exeter. And Boston is going to be explained as the midnight cry, which is going to explain all about the tarrying time. We can go to Habakkuk and Ezekiel to explain the tarrying time. It can all be understood because now they're understanding that July 21st is midway. Concord we don't have any information of. We could go to the name and we could begin to see what the word Concord means and its significance. And then Exeter, there's the final separation, fanaticism ends. There are 3,000 people there, which is parallel in the 300 charts. The cry is given all around, and there are 2 messages that we can see there. One of them is an untrue message saying that we don't have any direction, and the other one saying that we do have direction. And And I don't know if anybody thought about that. We know that July 21st is midway. We've got that here. We know that Concord is midway between Boston and Exeter, and I'm suggesting therefore Exeter should be midway between something. So you'd have to work out some dates because it's all about time. So we've done that. There's this preparation now for the future. Preparation for the future is about the 7th month. It's called the 7th month movement. Obviously we'd looked at early writings 248, 260 and the True Midnight Cry document. All of that is showing us that third angel's message is going to arrive, what the great move that's going to be in heaven. October the 13th. October the 13th is going to prepare you, because what is October the 13th? Sorry? It's the Feast of Trumpets. It is the first day of the 7th month. If you're going to make October 22nd the 10th day of the 7th month, and you just go back and see what the Feast of Trumpets is, it's a warning to prepare for what's about to come. And El Temple, is that Leaf Temple? Oh, the Living Temple, sorry, yeah. So this is the Living Temple, and that's about all we did. What did this mean, by the way? P1 and P2. What did we say that meant? Sorry? Oh, yes. Okay, so before we make an application, what things have we got that are outstanding that we said that we're going to try and cover and we didn't? Someone had a list of things they said, oh, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. No one? Everyone's happy that we've done everything?
Elect.
Sorry?
Elect.
Okay, there's the elect.
Also elects on this generation.
All these things, this generation. So let me just tell you what I think about that. You get Matthew 24, and hopefully now we can see that it's in 3 parts, 3 dispensations. The disciples, the 1260, and the end of the world. And in verse 34, is it 34? It says all these things. $34? Yep. Is it verse 34? Okay, so someone tell me what contextually all these things mean according to their understanding. What do they think it means, all these things?
It events all the signs.
It is those things, but what is, how much is all?
All those signs.
Beginning where?
Beginning from the first sign.
Right from here?
Yeah.
So it's all of these things.
Yeah. And all these things are at the end.
So it's just, you're saying it's all of these. So we had 3 different positions. Someone said all, and someone said all, and someone said all. Why did you say it's just this one? Why did you say it's just that one?
I think I said last time. It is because when you go to verse 34 says, "When they come to you, the generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." Like you connect verse 34 to verse 33, says, so likewise, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at hand. So I'm picking verse 33 because it has the phrase, all these things, and it's admonishing that when ye shall see these things, know that it is at hand. So what is the it? My Martin references say that the it should be he. So when you see all these things, you should know that he is near, even at the doors. So what is being spoken here specifically is about the second advent.
So verse 34, you connect to verse 33, proof text, by those statement, all these things. And then verse 33 says, it is near. It's going to tell you what is near. He's coming. Carry on.
So, verse 33 says, so likewise, when ye shall see all these things, know that he is near. So we have all these things and he is near. If you go back to verse 32, you are given a parable, which tells you there is a fig tree, and you put the fodder, a tender branch, you know that summer is near. So I'm to line up summer, because like verse 33 is repeated in large of verse 32. Summer is the advent. He is near. When that fig tree puts forth its leaves, is the old thing that we're supposed to see to know that he's coming is near, or summer is near.
Okay, so 34, all these things, verse 33, all these things. It says, note that it is near. We won't use the marginal reading, we'll just read it as is. What is the it? Contextually. Go back. It's the summer, isn't it? Can we see that? When you see, so likewise, when you see all these things, so all the things must be something to do with the fig tree. So when you see the fig tree, when its branch is tender and it puts forth leaves, they're all the things that you're to see, then you know that it is near, that summer is nigh. You okay with that? So now you've connected 34, 33 with 32. So when you're at 32 now, you've got a framework. When you can see the branch is tender and the leaves are coming out, then you know that summer is near. So likewise, when you see these things, likewise means what?
In a similar.
In a similar. So what is that?
It's comparing the same.
Which is? This is a parable. So what's the natural?
Verse 32.
The fig tree is the natural, then you have to see what the spiritual is. So you have to see what the tender branch and the leaves are. So what's going to be, I guess, interesting is when we go to the natural and the spiritual is actually going to be what? Are they going to be spiritual things, or are they going to be literal natural things? It's going to be literal natural things, isn't it? So an example, I'm not saying this is correct, when you see the branches tender, then you know all these things are near, and you could go back and say when you see people killing each other, that would be the leaves. But seeing people kill each other is a natural phenomena. It's not something spiritual normally that we would think of. We can see that? Okay? So we've got back to verse 32. We know that his coming is near, because we can do the marginal reading, but we can also tie it back to verse 32. And now there's this parable that's been created.
So I've explained verse 34, 33 and 32. When you look at this story that Jesus is giving, it ends in verse 31.
What ends in verse 31?
The story that is given in Matthew 24 ends in verse 31.
So the prophecy.
Yeah.
So prophecy ends in verse 31.
So in verse 32 is going to give a parable. So in verse 31 what we have, basically verse 30 and 31 is the Advent.
Verse 30 and 31 is the Advent. When you see this cloud, this is not Daniel 7:13. I'm saying I don't believe that's actually even correct to do that. When we see him moving from one apartment to another, you can't put that in that passage and be true to what the intent is. It would be doing what the Millerites would be doing, changing the location of the cloud, if we like. Okay? So we know that's the second advent.
And the second advent, if you verse 13, that one, the advent, if you connect with verse 32, 33, and 34, it is the summer of the parable.
So 30 and 31 is the summer.
Then the fig tree putting forth its tender leaves will begin in verse 29, which are the signs that this summer of the advent is doing.
So why are you limiting it to 29 and not going back to the Dark Ages?
Here it speaks of the signs that will tell us that the advent is near.
Okay.
Back to the Dark Ages. Like, what are you saying? In the beginning from 538, I don't see how there is an harbinger that is coming is new.
Okay, so you're going to use the logic. 34 takes you to 33. 33 is the comparison of the parable of verse 32. That it is the second coming, and it's also the summer. So if you go back to 31, 31 is the prophecy. 30 is connected to 31, which is basically the second coming. This is Revelation 1:7. That would be the summer. And then you go back to 32, the natural. You have spring, doesn't say spring, but you've got spring and then you've got summer. The two seasons that are next to one another. When you see the branch, you know that summer is near. It says nigh. Verse 33 it says, when you see these things, you know it's near. How far can you go back? Can you go back 2,000 years and say, we know that his coming is near? Can you really do that? In the disciples' mind, can you do that? If you're a disciple, you can do that. It could be near. We know Paul is going to deal with this issue because the people of his congregation, what's happening to them? In Thessalonians, what's happening to all those people? They're dying, and when they die, there's a problem. Because what are they expecting to see? They're expecting to see the Advent. So they're saying, what's going wrong? Are these wicked people who are dying, or is the prophecy not working? And then Paul's going to explain. What's he going to explain? He's going to explain that your understanding back here in Matthew 24 is wrong, and you need to rethink things. And Christ's coming is not going to be for a long time. Until when? 1, 2, or 3?
2.
Until the beginning of 2 or the end of 2? Which is 3. So Christ can't come back until you get to number 3. So Paul's already explaining that. So we know that the Dark Ages is not near. If you weren't careful, like a disciple wasn't careful, you could say that the near is the destruction of Jerusalem AD 70, because the words flow that way because Jesus is combining the end of the world with the destruction of Jerusalem. But when you read it true to its word, then you see it's 3 dispensations, and the Dark Ages, or all of these things, they're just not near. Are we okay with that? So you're forced to come to this conclusion, this all. My brother, is that okay? Yeah? Any other points?
Having done that analysis from the Bible, Ellen White confirms that in Desire Radio 632, paragraph 1 and 2.
2?
Paragraph 1 and 2.
So we'll quickly read that. Desire of Ages 632. At the close of the great papal persecution, Christ declared the sun should be darkened, the moon should not give her light, next the stars would fall. And he says, learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise, when you see all these things, you know it's even near at the door. Christ has given signs of his coming. He declares that we may know when he is near, even at the doors. He says of those who see these signs, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. These signs have appeared. Now we know of a surety that the Lord's coming is at hand. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. So we can proof text that. So what about these other options? Because everybody, especially evangelists in our church, are going to say, we know that Christ's coming is near because of what? They always pick up the wars and rumours of wars. So how do you do that? That's 2,000 years ago. Brother Wilson.
I think there is a quotation read in the book of Without Ages. You see, Calvary history, the disciples of the end of the world. For example, the destruction of Jerusalem, and not to tell you that also Christ foresaw what is going to happen at the end of the world. Because he's going to compare the destruction of Jerusalem with the end of the world. So to me also, all those things that happened in the time period of the destruction of Jerusalem, because there is nothing new under the sun, they're going to be repeated now at the end of the world.
Anyone else? My brother, how would you explain this? Is it just these events here? All of this is just of no benefit to us? Are we misapplying scripture?
We see them as an application. The only things will be at the end. And I would love to bring in the structure of the way Christ is doing in Matthew 24. And we see that from verse 1 to 28, it is a parable in verse 28. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the evils be gathered together, which remarks as a confusion. And in verse 32, he also gives a parable. And I see the parable we have there between the histories.
So we've identified that there's a break here, and 28 takes you up to this point. Anyone else?
So, for example, we know, you go to the issue of the 1260, we know it's going to be repeated again. For example, when we read the book of Revelation chapter 6, we see souls crying under the altar. And if you study, the 1260 is going to be repeated at the end of the world.
My brother?
Yeah, I'm also thinking the same way that you're also thinking, because the history of the disciple is the one which is being repeated at the end of the world.
So what we can do is we can take this line of progression, and if you took it as a line of progression, where are all the things going to have to be? They have to be this one. So if we use progression, we're going to begin here and go all the way to the end, and all the things have to be here. And we're picking that up from the word near. Are we okay with that? But we know we can use two principles when we look at any kind of history. So we can use progression, and what else can we use? We can use typology, or what we might call line upon line. So then what we would do is what? We'd get a pair of scissors and we'd begin to cut up this history. So we'll cut the history here. We know there's a break of about 400 years, and then we'll cut it here. So we've got 3 separate histories now, 1, 2 and 3. And now we can say all, and all. Are we okay to do it that way? Which is what most people do without realising it. Don't realise what they're doing and how they're doing it. And if you don't realise the methodology behind it, you can begin to make mistakes, or at least not understand things in their proper significance. So this event here is this event, approximately, depending on how you're going to do that. For certain, this one is this. This is Jerusalem, and this is the end of the world. This one would have to deal a bit more carefully, the 1260. But it is connected, because the 1260 is the deadly wound of the papacy back here, and we'd have to connect that of how it ties into end time prophecy. So once you start breaking it down and overlaying them, it gives you a much more detailed perspective of what's going on. Are we okay with that? I'm sure we all know that, but I wanted to lay it out in a formal way so that we know what method we're using, so we can see that. Anybody's got any comment on that?
Luke uses all these things, or at least things 3 times. I don't think in Mark each one. He seems to have the vision. So he says that in verse 9 he says, these things must first come to pass, the Messiah is connected to Jerusalem. And then in 22 he says, these are the days of vengeance, after the things which are written will be fulfilled. I think he's looking back to 1260. And then it says, after looking for those things which are coming on the earth in 26, so he thinks he was confused. And in 28 he says, when these things begin to come to pass, they will come.
So the first one you want to give me is Luke what?
Verse 9.
So Luke 21:9, but when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. That? Yeah? So if you go to Matthew 24:6, it says exactly the same thing. For all these things must come to pass. And that's in this dispensation. You've got all here, just like you had all there. Second one you want to take us to?
Verse 22.
Oh, sorry. Mark 13:7. So I won't do the chapters. It's 24, 13 and 21. That's the chapters. And it's verse 6, verse 7, verse 9. Verse 6, verse 7, verse 9 in Matthew, Mark and Luke.
Mark is verse
7. So it's verse 6, verse 7 and verse 9. Matthew, Mark, Luke. So the next one you want to take us to? Oh, in Mark it says, for such things must be. I'll read it, all 3 of them. All these things must come to pass, for such things must needs be, for these things must first come to pass. And all 3 of them say, the end is not yet, with some variation. Next one.
22.
This is Luke. Luke 22. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. So this all there verse 22 is still in this passage here. So you got, they're both in that same section. You agree with that? Verse 22, there is no equivalent in Matthew or Mark. It's a statement that's on its own in Luke 22. There is no parallel passage to that. If you want to see the context, if you went to Luke 21, then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains. That's Matthew 16 and Mark 14. So Matthew 16, Mark 14, Luke 21. They're the parallel verses. Then Luke 22 says, for these are the days of vengeance, that all these things which are written may be fulfilled. And then verse 23 says, woe that has child. And then Matthew and Mark have the same, which is Matthew 19, Mark 17. Was that too much information? Matthew, Mark, Luke, it's 16 to 18, 14 to 16, and 20. Sorry, 21. Then you have 22, and there's nothing there. Then you have 23, and it's 19 and 17. These are all the verse numbers. The next one.
And then, before the next thing, I want to pick up the end of verse 24. I think this shows the access on between 22 and 24, the word fulfilled. Because now it's talking about the dark ages. And I don't think you make that link that 22 is referring to instruction for each one, but also could be referring to this 12, 16 seem to be thinking them. It talks about one together to the subject of the great distress of the land, which shall fall by the sword, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down to Gentiles. Seems like all that connects to that, but then that's instruction for Jerusalem as well. And it says, until the times of Gentiles be fulfilled, and so people say, which are written may be fulfilled. So I don't think it has to see, we can say that that's all connected. So all that it kind of finishes off that by saying all that's going to be fulfilled.
I think you're trying to stretch those words out to put a all here for the verse 22 all.
Well, at least they're fulfilled. Fulfilled mark at the end point of the section, and then it starts at 24. So we're going to be 5, and there should be signs in the sun and in the stars, and that's a section. So that's not fulfilled.
Well, if you're going to say all things which are written, that's everything then. You can't just say that's, you're going to compartmentalize that to section 2.
Yeah, okay, so maybe he's closed off that one fulfilled, and that's closing off this section fulfilled. So until this is section so just trying to think about this closing off the section, and not necessarily things.
I don't think anyone can hardly hear what you're saying, and you're speaking too fast, and I'm not keeping up.
So in 22, he's saying that these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. So he's closing off that section by saying all these things are going to be fulfilled up to that point. And then the next section is...
The next section is verse 23.
23 and 24 together.
Yeah, but 23 you have to parallel with Matthew and Mark, and then not the Dark Ages. That's 80-70.
You do, but because he says, and they shall fall at the edge of the sword and the runaway captive, can you not link? You can't link that with that being the story. Even if you could, would you say that he's finished that section which is all to be fulfilled, and now he's saying, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled, he's now closing off that section, and then he starts a new thought, and there shall be signs of the sun and the stars. You just see, he closes things off and it's fulfilled, and moves on to the next section.
So you want to pick up the word fulfilled. So, are we happy that we can break up this section and that's the methodology that we're using? Yeah? I want to pick up one more point. This is where you begin to make mistakes, I'm suggesting. I don't know the answer to this, but I'm suggesting the approach. If you just see this as progression and you just start playing with these verses in an ad hoc and loose fashion, I asked the question a minute ago, what's the premier sign that the end of the world is coming? That Adventists always use. So it's all about wars. And what do they mean when they say wars? Which wars? They mean any wars. Is that correct? That can't be correct, can it? Especially when you see the 3 sections. Because when you go to the 3 sections, the wars are only in this one here. So here are the wars. And what you need to do is go back to the history and understand what the wars are. They're not just any old wars. They're very specific wars for specific reasons. So when you start seeing what the wars are, the implications of those wars, then what you should be doing is taking that history, and when you make an application at the end of the world, you bring all the reasons for those wars into this future. So, as an example, those wars, who is involved in those wars? Just at a very simple, basic level.
The Romans.
The Romans. We'll go with the Romans. All these wars are connected with Rome, and Rome is the king of the north. So what you need to do when you come here and you're going to apply wars, you need to see wars that are connected to the king of the north. You might argue that every war at the end of the world is connected with the king of the north, but I'm not sure if that is really true. So that's just a simple way of thinking about the necessity of doing it this way, making it into 3 individual components or sections, and being careful about the original intent, the original history, the context, and then making a proper application. So the wars, there's internal civil war going on, there's vying for power, there's a war between Rome and the Jews. So there's many things that are going on, but they're all centered about Roman wars, not just wars in general. So you can't just take wars and say, well, that's what's, because there's lots of wars nowadays, that's what's being discussed. Is that okay?
So I was thinking, like, if all these things are Roman 3, then, okay, let me make a comment first, then I'll ask the question. We have said that we can either see all these things are from Roman 1 to Roman 3 when we use progression. And I was thinking, like, that is correct because we can apply the events that...
No, I'm saying you can't do that. I'm saying you can't say all these things is from here all the way. You can't use progression to do that. Progression would only be here. I want to keep the line of progression. It would begin here because the wars in Rome are not near. The wars in Rome is not a sign that the end is near, the end of the world at least. The wars in Rome are the sign that Jerusalem is about to be destroyed, not the end of the world.
What do we do with Daniel 11? We apply the wars that happened 2,000 years ago. And you see, when you see halfway, you know there is no. The same can happen to Matthew 24.
Yeah, but...
all those wars happened 2,000 years ago. But that is what we are using to see that our end is near. when we apply them now.
So what gives you the license to take a 2,000-year-old battle and bring it to the end of the world?
The second methodology.
So it's this methodology. That's all I want us to see. That we want to be careful about the methodology, so that people know what we're doing. So we know what we're doing. We're not saying 2,000 years is near. It's not a natural reading of the word. We have to manipulate it. But as soon as we break the passage, we might argue, are we allowed to break passages? How do we break them? But as soon as we do break them, then we can go back to a natural reading. Because the wars are near. We know that they're near. And all we're saying is the destruction of Jerusalem is the end of the world. So we have to give evidence for that, some kind of logic to connect these two and bring this underneath, so the two stars would line up. So
now to my question. We've agreed that all these things are Romans 3. And what was the mistake of the Millerites then? Because they could see all things, I believe this part of the passages that were tricking them. Because they could see all these things being fulfilled and they were like, now Christ has to come. What was not fulfilled in their history? Because I think they saw everything being fulfilled in their history and now they were ready because Christ is coming.
I agree. I think everything in Matthew 24 was fulfilled. Or would have been. Maybe it doesn't all get fulfilled in October 44, because we still have the spring revolutions of 48. So we still have to deal with the spring revolution. There's still more stuff to happen. Because they might argue 1840, the wars, rumours of wars. They could argue the wars, rumours of wars in Europe, the revolutions that are going on in 1798, the wars between America and England in the early 1800s. So there's lots of wars and rumours of wars going on. There's intrigue and all of that. So I think they've got enough information to fulfill all of these passages. But I'm not sure what's behind your question. I'm saying this wouldn't be 1844, but this could be 63.
That is correct.
Okay, so if this was 63, you go from 1798 to 63. The Dark Ages would have been fulfilled.
Yeah.
And all of these wars and persecution, the trouble that you're going to get into, that would also have been fulfilled.
So now, how do we see all those things in our history?
How do we see them in our history?
Yeah. How do they help us to see that the second Christ is coming? They have already been fulfilled past our history.
Because we make applications. Brother Wilson said the 1260 is going to be brought here to the end of the world by using Revelation 6, 9 to 11, and then Revelation 20, verse 4. You can connect those two together. It becomes much more difficult to get this one and bring it to the end of the world.
Yeah, then my opinion could be, as we are bringing them correctly, Roman 1, Roman 2, and Roman 3, Roman 3 takes you to...
You keep on saying Roman.
That is what 1 to 3.
Numerals.
Okay, that's fine. I thought you meant because I never said Rome.
Okay, so let me use history 1, history 2, and history.
No, the only reason I said that, I'm okay if you want. I thought you were trying to make a point, because this is Rome 1, 2, and 3. It's a triple application.
Yeah.
This is pagan, papal, and modern Rome. I wasn't sure if you were trying to say that. Because I never mentioned Rome, I just said 3 dispensations, and you said Rome. So I thought you meant Rome, because it is Rome, isn't it? Isn't this pagan Rome? Papal Rome, modern Rome. So it is Rome. I thought you were trying to make that point. And if you did use Rome that way, it's a further line of evidence that actually we do have triple application to me, this is a neat way of explaining triple application in a soft way, because we know which Romes these are. This is after the deadly wound has been healed, papal and pagan. That's all clear, and we know that they're all happening at the end of the world. So you know that pagan Rome is going to happen at the end of the world. So we can do a lot with that just by. That's why I thought you were making. That's one of the points you were making, that you can make it Rome. Okay.
Okay, now, so would it be correct if we say you substitute the end of the world with 1863, and then when we come to our history, what we'll be doing is like, we will only be applying, you see,
We will only
be applying all the histories to the end of the world, so that the end of the world is not there, but it leaves us at 1863. What we happen to do in our history is only applying all the three histories.
If you go to Desire of Ages 623, she tells you how to apply this passage. She's applying this from 1798 to the end of the world, and she's here.
But if you go to look to...
So she spiritualized the generation.
I realize that. But she misses our history.
Misses it or includes it? Because our history is here. So she's included our history. She says we've begun it in 1798 and we're here and the end is near. The more I'm suggesting, to whatever you think, the more you see Ellen White's writing, she has no visibility of this history in the way that we do. She just says, Christ is going to come back now in my generation with me. She has no idea. I don't mean that she's going to die, I don't mean it in that way, but she doesn't have this idea that this waymark here, this one here, is this one. She won't do that. She's not going to recycle information like get Daniel 11 verse 40 and break it into two parts, use a chiastic structure and say this is the time of the end and this is the time of the end. She always says at the time of the end 1798 and in the time of the end. She doesn't have these two time of the ends. So she's never going to give you a model that you can go to. I don't think that you can go and say, see, we've got this separate unique history. It's all present tense. She admonishes and rebukes people for projecting into the future and say, by the way, we're going to all die and Christ is coming back in 100 years. You're not allowed to say that. So everything is present tense. She has no visibility that, at least in her writings, I don't know what she thinks, that she's going to die and other people are going to be raised up. And worse than that, we're going to literally go to 4 or 5 generations. Because you've got people today who are like 4th, 5th generation Adventists, and their first generation is in the time period of Ellen White. So we're about 5th generation now, literally, not prophetically, maybe even 6th, depending on how, when you got married. She doesn't do that. All she keeps on doing is this history here, the Millerites, and I don't think she teaches anything besides that. What we're now doing is we're creating this waymark here. I don't think she gives you any help, and this you have to do through structures or line upon line. And the key verse is verse 40. But I don't know if that was what your question was or your point.
Yeah, that was not the point. But I've seen the question I wanted to ask is already answered.
Is
already answered.
Okay.
Yeah. So lastly, you may have done that, but probably I missed it. So when you go to Luke 21 now, you realize that.
Which verse?
Luke 21, verse 27, verse 28.
28.
Yeah.
Let me get there. Luke 21:28. So this is Matthew 30, Mark 26, and Luke 27 and 28.
She seems so in 28 it says, and when these things, and I believe these things is what you have said is from verse 25.
Okay.
Because it says, and when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. So when these things I'm achieving from 25 to 27.
Okay.
And when now you go to verse 29, it says, and they spake to them a parable beyond the fig tree and all the trees. When they now shoot forth, ye see and know your own selves that summer is now at hand. So likewise, when ye see these things. So, and in this context, in verse 31, these things are from 29 and 30.
Say that last bit again.
I'm saying, when you go to verse 31, Luke will mention, so likewise, ye when ye see these things. So in verse 31, which are these things? 29 and 30.
Okay.
So Luke seems to say these things of 25 and 29 without Matthew 24. In Luke, they are separate events, and what upon somebody comes and say the things that the generation is supposed to see, they are only 29 and 30.
The problem that Brother William is bringing up is in Luke 21, verse 28, there's no equivalent verse in Matthew or Mark. So in Matthew, it begins in verse 30, then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man come in the clouds of heaven with great power and great glory. Mark 26 says, then you shall see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And Mark and Luke don't have the beginning bit of verse 30 of Matthew. Matthew says, then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. Mark and Luke don't have that. They don't have this bit when it says the signs. All both Mark and Luke say is, then you shall see the sign of the Son of Man, then you shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. It doesn't mention about the sign in either of those two books. And then Luke 28 says, and when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. So, what are you saying 28 is referring to, or people might query?
I'm saying 28, these things are from 25 to 28, and from 25 to 27.
This Revelations. Okay, so that's in agreement with Matthew and Mark.
Yeah.
So we are okay with that?
Yeah. But now when you come to 29...
So let's go to 20, let me get there. So Matthew and Mark, when it says all these things, it was connected to the parable. We have to use that parable to go back. But in Luke, you don't have to do that. It's directly in the passage itself. That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
So let's go to... So before we go to there, if Matthew and Mark then speak about then shall he send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather the elect. That's not in Luke either. There's no information about that in Luke, about the angels. So there's none of that. And then you get to Luke 29. He speaks a parable. Mark 28, he speaks a parable. Matthew 32, he speaks a parable. So all of those 3 verses now come into line again. So now he speaks a parable. Behold the fig tree and all the trees. When ye now shoot forth, verse 30, and you see of yourselves, you know that summer is near. All of that is paralleled. And then verse 31, so likewise when you see all these things come to pass, know that the kingdom of God is near at hand, or nigh at hand. Again, that's paralleling the Matthew and Mark passages.
It's correct, but now my question is, these things in verse 31, they are 29 and 30.
Okay?
When Luke says these things,
Yes?
they are 29 and 30.
Yes.
And then now, my problem is, now verse 32 will say, verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass. So the generation that shall not pass till all be fulfilled, which are all that are supposed to be fulfilled. Is it not 29 and 30 according to Luke only?
29 and 30
Yes.
only. Yes. And?
So if all these things are 29 and 30, then according to Luke, what justification do we have to start them at 1798 if it's only 29 and 30?
What is 29 and 30? Tell me the history of 29.
That is what I'm looking for. And we didn't.
29 isn't history.
It's a parable. Parable is an actual translation of something that has already happened.
When you go to verse 31, likewise when you see all these things, when we did that in Matthew, you seemed to be happy. You didn't complain about Matthew.
Yeah, it's because Luke seems to separate them, but Matthew does not.
If you ignore Luke 28, they're identical. So likewise, when you see all these things, know that it is near, even at the door. The word likewise in 31 is the same as Matthew 33. I think it's virtually exactly the same phrase. You went from 34 says what? 34 says all these things, and then when you ask all the things what they are, you go to 33, it says all these things. And it says, so likewise when you see all of these things, and likewise is connected to a parable. So the parable is the natural that's going to explain the spiritual. And the likewise, when you know that it is near, that means the summer is near. Luke will be identical. Yeah? So all that Luke is giving you, he's giving you an additional piece of information in 28 that ties you back to verse 25. And verse 25 is 29 to 31. So if we did it through Luke, Luke would have been easier. It would have been much easier to define that, because it says all literally in the prophecy, not in the parable. We wouldn't have had to gone back to through that route.
Yeah, I think I've seen what I've been missing.
Okay.
I agree. I was missing the fact that I was assuming these things and these things, they are different in Luke, but I've seen if it's a parable, it takes you back.
So what I agree with Sister Emery is that you've got all the things here and you've got all the things here. I'm not sure if we can do all the things into this one, because verse 21, Jerusalem shall be carried into captivity by the Gentiles. No, that's not 21, is it?
The Gentiles is 24.
24. When you get to that, it merges these two histories into one, because Jerusalem now becomes spiritualized from literal Jerusalem to a spiritual Jerusalem, which is the church, the captivity.
So seeing that merging into one, I think it's all merged into one, it's kind of a bit closed if I think. all these things which are maybe fulfilled in 22. I was just trying to pick up all those things. It's kind of saying it's all done when that starts in the section.
But what got lost in that dialogue was that all that's being brought to view here in Luke is not the all of Matthew. It's a different verse. Yeah, that's what didn't come out in that discussion. When it says all, this is part of the prophecy, the all. It's not a parable, and the all that's being brought for you here in Luke is the all in the prophecy bit. It's not using the comparison likewise, it does it twice. So there's an all and all here in Luke. If there's a question, we'll save it to the end because we've run out of time. Next class, if that's okay. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we ask and pray for a blessing upon this preparation day. Please guide and direct us. Help us, Lord, to tie together all the loose pieces of information that you have given to us so that we might continue to be strengthened and directed in your word. In Jesus' name, amen.